Welcome to our webinar for NHS Trusts titled Developing and Delivering Apprenticeship Programs. We thank you for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to explain a few things about our webinar platform to allow you to get the most out of the experience. All viewers will be in listen-only mode. However, to engage with the webinar, please use the on-screen panel. Using the tabs of this panel, you can adjust your audio settings as well. You can also use the question tab to engage with us. During our webinar, we will be running a number of polls. To record your response, please click on the on-screen voting button when asked to do so. After the webinar, we will be providing a recording of the webinar, a copy of the slides, and a Q&A sheet to address any unanswered questions. Now I'd like to hand you over to our presenters, industry expert Geraldine Dongworth and Strategic Partnership Manager for Healthcare, Tracy Kingsley.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and welcome everyone. For anyone who's just joined us, this is going to be a recorded webinar, so please don't worry. I'm hoping you've all got your Skype working or you're in the room and ready to go. We've got a lot of content to cover today, and we may not get through it all depending on questions, and we've got a couple of poll questions we'd like you to answer too. But generally, the contents of today is about your skills development and your workforce development plans. Now, firstly, I wanted to bring your attention to a new piece of research which is called People Power, and this is something that's been produced by our economic modelers EMSI and also City and Guilds. It's called People Power, and it's basically all about does the UK economy have the skilled people it needs for the future? And out of that report, which we will share a link at the end of the presentation, it actually shows that human health and social care, 93% are struggling within their sector to recruit the people they need. And out of that, 61% skills gap challenge is within health and social care arena, and that's against a national average of 48%. So, you know, we're here to help. We all need to work together to obviously grow the skills development and stop the shortage that we have to date. And also, just an insight, a quarter of employers in health and social care say that 11 to 24% of staff are from the EU. So again, you know, obviously we all know that Brexit is going to affect us, but what is the biggest impact? That is one, 51% saying Brexit is likely to have the biggest impact for them to grow over the coming years. But enough on the research. It's a lengthy document, so we can get that to you moving forward. So how can we support you? Okay, so as it says on the sheet, and firstly I should say it says NHS 70 years. I'd like to congratulate each and every one of you for working within the NHS service. I think you do a fantastic job, and it's great to be celebrating 70 years this week. So in terms of how we can support you, we are developing our proposition. As the new reforms have obviously been into play now for the last year or so, I'm still talking with NHS Trusts who haven't developed their plans yet, or only just starting to develop their plans. So that's something that I wanted to just sort of share with you. What else? So today we're going to be talking about obviously how we can deliver qualifications and how we can actually help with resources to help you build your skills, knowledge and behaviours if you're developing apprenticeship programmes, and how you can actually count on us for the support and the commitment to quality that City and Guilds always have. Okay, so at this point, key steps to developing an apprenticeship programme. What I am finding out in the field is that obviously everyone is very, very familiar with the levy tax now and is starting to try and build their workforce development plans. So really, I don't want to go and sort of tell you what you already know, but at this point, what we would like to do as well is actually to offer a short poll question. So I'm just going to hand back to Chloe before I go into this slide in more detail.
Thanks, Tracy. Right, so we're going to ask the first poll question. So you should see pop up on your screen, is your NHS Trust meeting its apprenticeship target? 2.5% of your workforce, sorry, 2.6% of your workforce. So you've got two options, yes, we have apprentices in roles, and not yet, we're working on our workforce development plan.
Okay, so we're just collating those responses at the moment. Hopefully everybody's starting to click. Can we see them coming through, Chloe?
Yes, we're seeing them starting to come through. We'll just give a little bit longer.
63% voted. Okay.
Okay, so we can see that everybody has said, not yet, we're working on our workforce development plan still.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And really, I guess that indicates what's happening when I'm out in the field meeting stakeholders and head of workforce development. What we want to do is to try and help you develop those robust plans, working not only as a department, but also very closely with your organisational development, aligning your business goals in accordance with those plans. And really to start identifying staff development and talent planning across all the NHS pay bands. Certainly working with the NHS over the last couple of years, I know that we've always talked about bands 1 to 4, and of course now the levies come into play. That's really opened up where people are going to potentially spend their money, but it's really, really important to make sure we're starting at that ground level and working up. So in terms of developing any skill gaps or recruitment opportunities, what we need to find out are those appropriate solutions. So checkpoints really is what I've put here. So, you know, what is your HR people plan and how are you going to tackle that current recruitment challenge? Now, this varies obviously from trust to trust. In one area of the country, we don't have any recruitment challenges and we've got people fighting over you know, the same job. In other areas, we've got huge diversity in terms of they cannot fill the vacancies. So again, as City and Guilds, we can actually help with that. So, you know, obviously after today, I'm hoping to build some relationships with some of you I don't already have relationships with, to actually look at your talent development and work with you on that. Does your trust have, what's it going to do in terms of achieving its public sector target? Can I just ask that as the second poll question, please, Chloe? Or maybe we'll come back to that. Okay, sorry. And also another checkpoint is, what is the 3 to 5 year forecast in place for both apprenticeship provision, for considering both planned and projected starts? Now, really what I mean by this is obviously a lot of people are looking at their plan for this year. What we need to try and do in terms of workforce development planning is really look at those projected forecasted starts between sort of 3 to 5 years, and that's where you really start to see what your workforce development plan looks like. And you know, I can hear you all sort of laughing there, thinking, well, I don't know what I'm doing next week, never mind in 3 to 5 years time. But again, we've got some areas that we can help you with there, mainly so that you can actually start to really pinpoint what your skills gaps are at ground level at this point, and then how you can actually start to tailor your training provision to meet those future talent pipelines. Okay. Secondly, in terms of developing the apprenticeship programme, what I've got here is to review all current training programmes where occupations can be mapped to apprenticeships. Again, I've got some trusts who almost have to wait for somebody to leave the trust before they can actually recruit an apprentice. And then I've got others who have got huge apprenticeship needs in terms of trying to bring on cohorts of 20, sometimes per month. So I appreciate that there's a big variance there. What I'm potentially saying here is that in terms of mapping apprenticeship standards to all job roles, just have a look at that for everything. In a little while, Geraldine is going to talk about the different sectors that we get involved in. You know, it could be within your trust, you might actually have hairdressers, or you might actually have people who are on facilities and grounds, or even within IT infrastructure. So it's not necessarily looking at, if you can't recruit for a healthcare support worker at this moment in time, so where are the other areas? And that's where really linking with the organisational development plans and workforce development plans will help you to start thinking, well, how am I going to reach that public sector target? I might not be able to do it because I can only bring in a cohort of 10 healthcare support workers at this moment in time. So where else can we actually try to drive those numbers forward? So key considerations, you know, where are your largest recruitment vacancies? And also just to remember that we still have the existing SACE framework, so they will obviously be continuing alongside the new standards during the transitional period. One note that I got recently from a trust was the skills development at the moment in terms of HCA vacancies was about 12,000. So if we don't start trying to get some of these onto cohorts, you know, from sort of September onwards, you know, we really aren't going to tap into this workforce development crisis really that we have. But I don't need to tell you that, you guys know that already. Okay, so the next step really is deciding how best to deliver an apprenticeship programme through multiple delivery methods. Now, what I'd like just to understand as well is how many of you have actually registered onto the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers. From the attendee list, I can see I've got a couple of main providers, some employed providers and some supporting. If you've not decided to go down one of those routes, or you're deciding that you are going along both of those routes, you could be using private training providers and being a supporting provider, or you could very well be an employed provider for some elements and then working with colleges or training providers to help supporting other areas. So one thing that City and Guilds have is a wide customer base within private training providers and also colleges, and they are too also trying to manage this change. So again, we can kind of put you in contact and collaborate so that colleges and training providers also know what elements you're going to be delivering, and then where are they best to start, you know, looking at their business and where they need to concentrate to work in line with you. But in terms of ROTAP, it would be interesting at the end of today to find out who's on as a main, an employer or supporting provider. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Geraldine, who's going to talk about the delivery of the new apprenticeship standards and a little bit about health.
Just before we do that, we'd like to do another poll with you, if that's okay.
Okay, so you'll see a poll pop up on your screen now. So what roles do you currently have apprentices in? And we've got a few options there: business support services and customer service, support services like hospitality and catering, leadership and management, IT and digital support services, health and care delivery.
You can actually choose more than one option here, so if it's all of them, please tick all of them.
Just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so there seems to be a split between business support services and customer service, and health and care delivery, with that being the most popular one between the two.
Thanks, Chloe. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to take you through the apprenticeship process, actually, from recruitment of an apprentice through to occupational competence. And again, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this process. So starting with initial assessment then, it's really, really important that an apprentice understands the whole process of their apprenticeship journey, so that when you're talking to an apprentice at the beginning of that journey, the apprentice understands that endpoint assessment is involved in this apprenticeship journey. That's to ensure that the apprentice is thinking about their end goal and their occupational competence right from the word go, so that you don't get to a situation where at Gateway the apprentice might think, well, actually I've had enough of that now and I don't really want to go forward for endpoint assessment. None of us want that, because we want our apprentices to go through the whole process and come out with their apprenticeship completion certificate. So following on from initial assessment, there'll be an on-programme phase on which there needs to be both on and off the job training. And we're going to talk a little bit about the requirement to have the 20% off the job training a little further into the webinar. So the on-programme element can consist of a knowledge and skills, behaviours type programme, which could be included in a qualification, or it could be something that employers can put together for their programmes, or with the support of training providers or FE colleges, that can be designed and delivered. At Gateway, each of the standards is different in terms of its requirement, but there certainly needs to be a meeting of some description with the apprentice, the training provider and the employer to decide whether that apprentice has met the Gateway requirements and is ready to go forward for their endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessment again will be dictated to by the standards, where there might be a range of assessment methods. There'll be at least 2 methods of assessment. So that takes place, and at that stage the apprentice will be, where successful, will get a completion certificate and be deemed to be occupationally competent. Now at City and Guilds, we've got a very wide range of industry areas that we work in. It's 28 actually, but probably looking at this slide, you can see definitely that there's a whole host of those that would be appropriate to individuals working in the NHS and healthcare services. But what we'd like to say here really is that we can help to develop programmes in order to support these where there is demand to do so. Just a few that we've picked out as where we think there will be popular demand for these, and it's interesting actually that the top 2, it's not that interesting really. We probably could have predicted that, to be honest, but the top 2 and the survey said business support services and healthcare delivery would be the most popular. We think that there will be some demand for IT digital services in the conversations that we've been having with some employers, but obviously we appreciate that the numbers actually are going to be much smaller. And then around support services, again, that's likely to be quite low in number. However, leadership and management we think will be really popular, and as we all know, it's a very common theme, an area of development for a lot of organisations. And within the group, within the City and Guilds group, our partners ILM have a wide range of standards that they're working on in that leadership and management area.
Geraldine, if I can just add there, I'm working very closely with the ILM team to actually go out on joint visits to see a number of trusts to actually look at both the ILM products as well as obviously some of the broader occupational families.
Thanks, Tracy. So looking at the health sector in particular, then there's some interesting things that I need to share with you. So we have a whole host of existing qualifications that have been used and are still being used in apprenticeships, both SACE and now in the standard. But if I can start with level 2, these are related to the healthcare support worker standard. Obviously, there's no mandatory qualification requirement there, but we do have several options for employers to use should they decide that they would like qualification in their level 2 standard. And one of those is the level 2 certificate in clinical skills, which is obviously a certificate size qualification, much smaller than the diploma in care, for example, and it fits well with the standard. In fact, we've mapped it to the standard, and there is a gap, but actually it's basic life support, which learners would cover in their care certificate anyway. So we think that's a really good fit. Another thing that might add value to an apprenticeship would be the level 2 award in medical terminology. This is a qualification which is a single unit actually, and is assessed by a test, a paper test at the moment, and that's a qualification that we offer jointly with our partner AMSPA, and I'm sure many of you who work in the NHS will be familiar with AMSPA qualifications, generally for medical secretaries. Then we've got the fact that the SACE framework for support services in healthcare is still open. Therefore, we've previously extended our level 2 certificate to meet that need. I'm sure that those of you who are involved in healthcare qualifications delivery will remember the changeover from the first version of the standards for senior healthcare support worker to the second version of the standard, which contains the new qualification. But in the meantime, there was a little bit of a hiatus. And so what we did at that time was to extend our, what we would have called previous qualifications, to support apprentices moving forward with those quals, whilst we were waiting for the new qualification to come into the standard. In fact, that they are listed there, and we've kept them open, and those qualifications will continue to be open until at least January of next year.
Sorry, just an added bit of insight, speaking to a number of trusts, they've actually not yet gone over to standards. They're still with framework because assessors are obviously used to working in the framework world, and so it's obviously taking time for them to get up to speed. So again, that's something I can potentially work with trusts on to actually help you to move over to the standards delivery, and obviously go to the new diploma that's mandatory at level 3. Okay.
Of course, the SACE frameworks are closed now in healthcare, so anyone who is not working towards a framework would need to work towards the standard.
Yeah.
And that really goes for the level 5 standard too, and we do have a qualification which is well mapped very well to the healthcare assistant practitioner standard. So on this slide here, I've summarised where we're at with each of these standards, just very briefly. So the healthcare support worker, the standard is published, as is the assessment plan. The number there is our product code for our endpoint assessment product, which you would need to use to both apply and to register apprentices. And actually that product is open for registrations at the moment, and we have had registrations on that. The next one, senior healthcare support worker, is a little bit more complicated, I might say. There was a revision made to the standard to include the new qualification, which was published in February, but actually the assessment plan, which is published, has been revised and is going through the process with the Institute for Apprenticeships at the moment. So we are expecting that new assessment plan to be published. Actually, we think and hope it will be this week. Because that is actually what we are going to base our endpoint assessment product on. And the reason that we're doing that is because we think it's better streamlined. Previously and currently, actually, because the assessment plan is published, this contains short answer questions as part of the assessment, and we believe that in the new assessment plan that those short answer questions will be replaced by another or a combined multiple choice question paper. So based on the fact that we need to work on the new assessment plan. We're predicting that our product will be available by November of this year, and we're working on the adult nursing support option only at the moment, and additional options will be made available at later dates. But all of this depends on that publication of the assessment. With assistant practitioner in healthcare, we've got both standard and assessment plan published. We're well on the way with our development of that endpoint assessment product, and we're hoping that that's going to open in August or September. So just to remind you about two qualifications that are fairly new, seems such a long time ago now that they were launched actually. The Level 2 Diploma in Care can be used as an optional qualification within the Healthcare Support Worker Standard, and the Level 3 Diploma in Healthcare Support is the mandatory qualification for the Senior Healthcare Support Worker Standard and contains units which suit all of the options. The next three slides are a summary of what's in the healthcare support worker, senior healthcare support worker, healthcare assistant practitioner qualifications. I think they're fairly straightforward, and you'll see that they mirror that first overview that I gave you in terms of what the endpoint assessment, the apprenticeship journey looks like. I'm not going to go through those in detail, and those of you who've listened or been involved in my webinars before will be familiar with those slides. I'm now going to hand back to Tracy.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Okay, so now we're looking at sort of working with us to obviously deliver apprenticeships. Since working with City and Guilds, I've been absolutely amazed with the different apprenticeship tools City and Guilds actually have to help providers obviously set up and do training themselves. So as part of this, obviously, we've got a number of delivery tools, and I know that one of the main concerns is obviously it's 20% off the job within the new standards. I don't think this is going to go away, and you know the interesting thing is it's always been there within the SACE framework. It just hasn't been pulled out as an absolute requirement, I suppose. In fact, it was more than 20%, wasn't that right, Geraldine? Was it about 20%? So it's not. It's always been around, but really, I guess the one vital element of this is that basically the off-the-job training must be directly relevant to the apprenticeship standard, and it must also take place within the apprentice's normal working hours. Again, I think you probably know this already, but in terms of some of the areas, this is always the area of, you know, we do get people phone up and say, you know, can we use this as off-the-job training, or you know what doesn't count, and you'll see here there's a huge range of methods that can deliver the training, and also so that if you haven't got a qualification within the structure of the apprenticeship standard, City and Guilds have got a range of learning tools and resources to help providers and employers develop a programme of learning that's mapped to the skills, knowledge and behaviours through off-the-job training. So, you know, things like teaching the lectures, you know, we've got a lot of ESFA guidance that is available, which can actually, I think we should put that at the end of this webinar, if that's okay. So, you know, whether it's amazingly, you've got educators who work within your trust who are fantastic at things like stimulated exercises and role play, and also online learning. So as part of our ePortfolio package, which I can talk about later, we actually map and progress that off-the-job training within our ePortfolio system. So if that's something that you're needing more time on, obviously I can come and talk to you about that at another time. But really it's about shadowing, obviously making sure your mentors are spending time with those apprentices, and practical training, and it could just be spending time in a different department, and obviously also the induction is a key part of off-the-job training. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, what I wanted to do now really was to observe the key themes to explore. So really our offer, as it says here, is designed around NHS employers, apprentices and centres. And we are basically focusing on the portability, visibility and the experience that apprentice receives. And we do that really through 4 different themes, and that's the learner journey and what that entails, the embedded assessment, tracking of that, and obviously preparing them for endpoint assessment. So we've obviously had a number of challenges that come from employers and from apprentices themselves. So how can we actually make sure we've got all the tools, if you like, to help you with that? So I'm just going to move on. What we've actually done, and this is something that's going to come up over the next couple of months as we actually deliver these webinars. The learner journey, really, we're having to look at it from 3 different personas. And those personas being the apprentice, making sure that they've got a clear learner journey and that they can actually plan their time effectively. From a provider perspective, making sure that they're tracking and having the motivation, the mentoring along the way, and making sure that everything can be tracked and measured. And then obviously from an employer perspective, if you're delivering training yourself, to make sure that you're mapping everything against the apprenticeship standards. In terms of the essential content, again, you'll see on the right-hand side, it basically is obviously saying this is still to do with learner journey, and throughout the presentation, you'll see the different colours associated with it. But really, the essential content that you'll all be aware of is to just keep you on track really with regulatory requirements. So we deliver this through what we call Smart Screen, which is our online teaching and learning platform. And there's support there for tutors, apprentices and also assessors. Okay, next slide. Okay, excellent. What we've also done here, and again, if you use our e-portfolio system, which we are obviously known as the Learning Assistant, we have a number of apprenticeship training manuals, which we basically, anyone who uses our license for our e-portfolio actually gets these training manuals within their license, and they're a program of learning that's fully mapped to the standard. We also have them in print format as well as within our e-portfolio system, and we also can help centres develop programs of learning as well. Obviously we do consultancy, etc. So, you know, depending on what your needs are, you may already have something that you'd want to include yourself, and that can be uploaded into our e-portfolio system. It will have things such as reflective practice and also activities to just check the learner's understanding. Okay.
It's probably also just worth saying that it'll be mapped to maths and English requirements as well, to identify those along the way.
Absolutely. So I know you can't really see this slide, but it just sort of gives you the detail. It really provides 30 tasks that support the apprentice progression, both leading up to Gateway and on programme. So it provides a full kind of apprenticeship or apprentice journey and full mapping to the standards. It's really all I can say about that at this moment in time. Obviously, touch base with me if you'd like to hear more about that. In terms of our online learning resources, we obviously have a number of resources and schemes of work. So that's all available in what we call Smart Screen, and we also have enhanced Smart Screen packages as well for certain standards. Okay, I'm whizzing through this now because I'm very conscious of time. Within our enhanced Smart Screen, we do have interactive videos, quizzes, etc. So that's important to know. So call on us if you need any help there. In terms of embedded assessment, again, talking about how we deliver that, we've done it from 3 personas. So I'm not going to go into any more than that. We'll get you to read that at your leisure, maybe on the train home if you're going on the train journey later. And in terms of mapping to standards, Geraldine has obviously talked you through some of our healthcare qualifications, but what we do have is we have qualifications to obviously support the online learning. Now, more often than not, we're finding that NHS Trusts are actually including a qualification within the standard. One, if they're delivering it themselves, their assessors are used to that, and secondly, it just gives a nice structure. If the clinical skills at level 2, for instance, I'm finding is very popular at the moment. But obviously this one is just showing customer service. So I've been told I need to move on. I could talk for a while. So with regards to embedded assessment, these are the sort of screens that you will see on some of the apprenticeship tools that we have that's available to you. We do also have a full suite of maths and English that we can offer, and if you would like to hear more about that, then please, email me. What we do have is 3 different sort of packages, so you can do initial assessment with City and Guilds, and then obviously buy licenses as well. So that's all I'm really going to say about the maths and English for now. In terms of tracking, this is probably the most important one for me to talk to you about, really, compared to the off-the-job and the vital 20%. The tracking is so important that, without the proper tools, if you like, that monitoring process is not going to allow apprentices to stay on track. And what we've actually got here within our tracking progress is, just moving on, onto the digital learning platform that we have. It can log 20%, where you can access all of our apprenticeship training manuals. You can upload your own resources, which I know is really important to NHS Trusts, who have put a lot of time and effort into building their own mega clinical programmes, etc. It offers learner tracking and monitoring and reporting in any which way that you need it, whether that's at board level or obviously at manager level with the learners. And with regards to showcasing, every piece of evidence that you put into our e-portfolio or for embedding purposes can be tracked. And then towards the end of Gateway, obviously you can then select which pieces of evidence you'd like to showcase. Just on the little map there, it just shows you employers, apprentices can use it, your internal verifiers can use it. Obviously we have super users and assessors. So really it just gives you an idea of the breadth of our e-portfolio and how it can log and record 20% for monitoring, tracking, and obviously showcasing preparation and tasks. Okay. Right. Now we need to, I'm just going to skip through those if that's okay. So these are more embedded resources. I'm very conscious of time and I do want to hear people's questions. So just going on to endpoint assessment preparation. Again, from a persona perspective, we obviously need to look at from the apprentice, the employer, and also the assessing provider perspective. So our EPA preparation tool is fantastic, actually. The feedback I get from this product, as soon as you register any endpoint assessment registrations with City and Guilds, we have a preparation tool that launches to allow learners to actually become more confident in skills that aren't part of the knowledge, skills and behaviours, but are part of trying to get to grips with endpoint assessment and actually get them ready for the test at the end. So that could be for a shy person, it could be trying to get them to build confidence, or for someone who's just maybe a little bit more direct, just to maybe try and find a little bit more empathy in the way that they come across to colleagues, etc., so that when they're on that observation and they're meeting that person who's assessing them from potentially 7 o'clock in the morning, they feel confident in how they can act and how they can achieve during the event.
It's probably worth saying that the endpoint assessment preparation tool is available to all learners who are registered for endpoint assessment products with City and Guilds, and it is a generic product which is useful across all sorts of standards, because what we've done is concentrated on the assessment method rather than the actual content of the endpoint assessment. So in fact, learners can move through this at their own pace and build their confidence around those individual elements of endpoint assessment.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so in terms of our EPA service, what we have got is we've got an updated manual that's we've got version June 18. So if you you may have one that's actually got January on it, so that's just literally been published at the end of last month. So you can click on the links there for that. And obviously, in terms of the way we're delivering endpoint assessment, you know, it's face to face. Everybody needs to go through. Our assessors need to go through a rigorous program. And I know Geraldine would potentially like to hear from any of you who would like to also become assessors as well. But really, the process that we've put in place, yes, I'm really pleased with it, and I know that colleagues spend a lot of time putting it together. Okay. So preparation at the heart of our service. So what we have done for all of our standards is to do a pack, an EPA customer pack for every standard. Now, as part of that, as you'll see on the slide deck, you'll get guidance on actually how to book your EPA, guidance on how to prepare for that showcase, the observations and professional discussion, but also examples of possible evidence. You may have someone who's done a piece of evidence early on in their gateway and they don't choose to put that forward, but actually it could be a very good example. You may not see it again later down the line. So, you know, by tracking all pieces of evidence, it's really important. But you can find more support for specific on-programme information on the following link.
Can I also add, for example, in healthcare support worker standard, we've provided a template for reflective activity. So that's one of the requirements around the portfolio of evidence that's required by the learner to prepare for their endpoint assessment. And therefore, we've written a sort of template framework around that, and that's found within the endpoint assessment pack. As Tracy said, we have an endpoint assessment pack for every standard. Some of the learning resources that we've talked about today, we've started to design and deliver on the most popular standards, and obviously we're going to be extending that to further standards in the future. But because preparation for endpoint assessment has been so key when we've been talking to customers, we're actually now starting to provide exemplar materials for, again, the most popular standards, which will include examples of evidence, guidance on what a successful observation looks like. These will be tailored to meet the requirements of each assessment plan. So once the learner has completed their endpoint assessment, they will receive a statement of achievement. In relation to resits, there are opportunities to resit elements of the endpoint assessment, but actually it again depends on the individual assessment plan as to whether a single element can be repeated or resat, or whether in fact it needs to be the whole process. But the guidance that we produce is based on the individual assessment plans. So it's really important that as learning providers yourselves, or when you're negotiating with learning providers, you actually understand that the assessment plan drives this forward. But the learner would achieve a statement of achievement, and then City and Guilds, as the endpoint assessment organisation, sends off results to the to generate the apprenticeship completion certificate, which is sent to the employer.
Okay, fantastic. Just wanted to give you a whistle-stop tour actually in terms of our endpoint assessment service. We've introduced a very simple pricing structure, and I think that you can pretty much see from this slide that basically you need to register with a £25 registration fee for putting an apprentice on EPA with City and Guilds on our system, and that's all you pay until the very, very end. And the reason we have introduced that £25 is obviously so that you can access all of our endpoint assessment preparation toolkit. So that's something that the learner gets straight away as soon as you've registered them. So it's really important, having spoken to a number of customers, that they sort of haven't thought about endpoint assessment yet because they're thinking it's only 6 months away. But actually, what's really important is to think of it from the learner's perspective and getting them as ready as you can, as quickly as you can. So potentially getting that endpoint assessment preparation toolkit will allow them to investigate different areas that they don't feel comfortable on, that's separate to the knowledge, skills and behaviours. There's no hidden charges in there. Basically, we have a registration fee. Then you have, you can see on the time scale of months between say 1 to 21, you don't put an EPA registration fee in at all. It's just charged after the EPA event. So if a EPA is £600, £25 up front, and then the after charge of £525 for the endpoint assessment.
So it's probably worth saying that that's an illustration, and obviously it would depend, the timing of that would depend on the length of expected stay for any particular apprenticeship. But I think the principle is that the remainder of the endpoint assessment charge is invoiced to you after the first assessment results have been entered into our systems.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, and in terms of resits, then I'll let you go through what this says, but basically, obviously your costs, they'll vary for each standard, but resits are covered to a maximum of 20% of the funding band. Apprentices who don't achieve their endpoint assessment will need to obviously resit, and you do need to pay a reservation request for each resit, which we can obviously talk about if we're at that point. So that's really, in terms of the pricing model, it's pretty simplistic. Back over to Geraldine now, just to talk about EPA assessors.
So we've been recruiting assessors over, it seems like ages now, and we actually train our assessors on a just-in-time principle, because we don't want them to forget their training before they need to carry out the endpoint assessment activity. What I'd like to just talk to you about, though, is the need that we have across all of our standards. As our registrations for endpoint assessment grows, we need to take on more assessors. I've put an example here of the person specification for the senior healthcare support worker, which is there on our website, amongst others, for people to consider whether they themselves would like to become endpoint assessors. So I'd like to hear from anyone specifically who'd be interested in the healthcare standards as an endpoint assessor, which you can do by contacting me directly or by going to our endpoint assessment pages on our website.
Okay, well, as we sort of draw to a close, just to sort of recap really in terms of where we are with endpoint assessment, we're currently delivering 42 different apprenticeship standards, and as an organisation, our endpoint assessment organisation, we're the first to actually deliver the new apprenticeship standards. We've got, I think this number's actually growing now. I didn't actually get the updated. I think it's probably over 7,500 now. This was actually a couple of weeks ago. So in terms of registered to take our endpoint assessment, it's growing literally weekly. We've got over 100 highly qualified assessors that we've recruited across all those different standards, but we'll never have enough, and we always want to make sure that we can actually be there in terms of what your expectations are. So going back to those workforce development plans, it's so important for me to understand what's coming up so I can speak to our endpoint assessment team and our strategic managers to help to make sure that it's a smooth transition. And we've actually had 800 plus learners go through a successful EPA event. So hopefully that shows that we're well into EPA assessments, and that's drawing us to a close, apart from, I know we're going to go for another poll here, aren't we, Chloe?
Yes, we're just going to do one last poll question before we head to your questions. So you'll just see the final one pop up on the screen. To meet your workforce requirements, what roles would you like to have apprentices in? business support services and customer service support services like hospitality and catering, leadership and management, IT and digital support services, or health and care delivery.
Okay, we've got a number of people needing still to vote. I appreciate we've covered an awful lot in today's webinar, but one of the reasons for asking these poll questions is to really understand, what areas it is that you would actually like us to focus on for the next event. So if we will collate everybody's feedback and anyone who's attended who'd like us to focus on one area or another. The next one could be recruitment, for instance. It could be our consultancy services, or just our digital products for any of you that are new to City and Guilds, or any apprenticeship tools that you may need. Okay, are we about there on the vote?
Yep, so we've got a split between leadership and management and health and care delivery. 25% leadership management, 75% health and care delivery.
Okay, no pressure, Geraldine.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, it's
fine
all
with
good.
us, yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you. So really now, just wanted to give you a bit of a keep up to date here with more information. For those of you who may not have registered for any email updates, you'll see there's a link to that. And obviously we also do events as well as webinars. And some of these events are absolutely perfect if you're thinking about delivering apprenticeship programs yourself. That it could be to do with quality, it could be to do with maths and English. So do have a look at those webinars. Some of them are paid for, but they are sort of very, very valuable events for you to attend. And thank you. We'd like to start having some questions come through now. So if you've got any general queries, then obviously you can contact apprenticeships@cityandguilds.com. If you've got any specific endpoint assessment questions, we've obviously got our EPA email address there too. And really, if you'd like any demonstrations of our apprenticeship digital tools or online support, you can go through to direct sales. And of course, I need to try and plug myself. If anybody would like me to come and see you directly, face to face, or have a first conversation over the phone, there's my email address just coming up. Most of you may already have Geraldine's, and we've also got Paul Rowbottom, who's our technical advisor as well, who I've also put on there. Now, they are mainly for health. We are going to be setting up some webinars for the other industry sectors too. So thank you very much.
So we've had a number of questions from you, so thank you very much for being interactive with us. I'll go to one which actually is more of a statement, but it's probably worth reading out. Can the participants see these questions? No, so I'll read the statement then. So Michael has written, many apprenticeships require learners to attend study, which can be one or more days in some cases. And what Michael's saying is that this means that where there are existing staff carrying out apprentices, that actually that leaves a gap in the workplace, which then needs to be filled in terms of delivering the service, keeping the service going. So I think that's acknowledged, Michael, and I understand that that's why people are saying that they might not be able to take on as many apprentices within their existing workforce as they would like to because of this 20% off the job. However, what I'd have to say is that needs to be looked at in terms of your workforce planning and delivery of the apprenticeships, because there's no getting away from the requirement for the 20% off job training, and perhaps to explore ways that that can be managed within your own organisations. I'm sorry that's not a more helpful answer, but them's the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Some trusts that I know are doing really well with it are actually doing it through a sort of cohort group basis. So they've sort of pre-planned their workforce strategy to say, okay, we're going to have 4 cohorts a year, and that's sort of planned in almost, you know, certainly at least a year beforehand, so that they can actually really try and understand how many days out, and we can actually work with you as well to look at those sort of weekly training plans, or I can rather, to actually just say, well, how can you achieve this in a cohort group, opposed to maybe an individual one-to-one basis, which could be more difficult. Okay, that's nothing else to say more on that.
And there's another question, but I'm afraid I need some clarification. The question is from Michael, and it says, within the NHS, OTJ is costly if backfill is required. Off the job. It's the same thing, isn't it? So, so I think perhaps we acknowledge that, and we need to work together to find ways of overcoming that challenge.
Cool, just keep your questions coming in.
That might be an area where our apprenticeship tools can actually fit in as well. So maybe more online training or blended learning.
Or actually thinking about it, looking at different ways to identify what is off the job, because there's no doubt that the off the job training has to happen in work time. But some of the examples that Tracy talked about earlier, for example, shadowing members of staff, that could actually be in the place where people are working. So we need to be very open as to what we identify as off-the-job training, I think.
Okay.
It doesn't look like there are any other questions, actually, but I'm sure that we would be able to follow up afterwards. So I'll hand over to Chloe to close the webinar.
Thank you. So as you can see on screen, we've got a few email addresses there. As Tracy mentioned, we've got our apprenticeships and EPA team email addresses there as well. So you can get in contact with us. Otherwise, we'll send out a recording of these slides and the webinar afterwards.
Many thanks.
Thank you.